Well, hello to everybody, and it's a pleasure to be back here again. I'm honored to be in the presence of such courageous people as we have heard in all of the previous panels and among the previous speakers. This program is to discuss the aid debate. You'll have to pause a little bit to figure out which one of those debates this really is about, and I'll leave it to my distinguished panel to each interpret for themselves what part of the aid debate they want to cover. It is a very distinguished panel. Let me just tell you, I urge you to take a look at some of the biographies and the speakers' biographies there to really get a sense of the depth. We have a distinguished economist from Ghana, cited as being one of the top 100 global thinkers, a very high accolade. A former French minister, still very much a leader, active on health and development issues in the world, an advisor to Ban Ki-moon on innovative financing. A Norwegian political leader whose extraordinary work across a number of different fields has led him to be called the conscience of the world. I can't imagine a higher accolade than that. And a Burmese human rights activist who has earned global recognition at a very young age. So I'm impressed by this panel, and I must say intimidated by it as well. For my part, I want to leave you with a few thoughts and just get this session kicked off. And the thoughts that I want to leave you with are essentially lessons learned by me in the course of many years of having worked these issues, both from the political and the developmental and the humanitarian side. And I want to focus on the intersection of development and freedom, the subject matter of this conference. The first of these, and these are lessons I should say that are learned by me as a result of failures that I have had and not having learned them earlier. First of these is that freedom is much more than the absence of tyranny. Much of what we have been talking about here over the course of the last few days is the heroic efforts of many people to throw out tyranny. But throwing out tyranny is only the first step in a process towards democracy. And in some respects, it is the easiest of the steps because although it requires enormous courage, it can sometimes be done quickly. Not always, but sometimes be done quickly. What is never done quickly is the consolidation of democracy. That takes tenacity, it takes good luck, it takes an awful lot. Institution building from the beginning to end. In fact, it takes all of the different things that development is and that aid assistance are designed to try and promote. The second thought I want to leave with you is that the ultimate enemy of freedom is not tyranny. The ultimate enemy of freedom is anarchy. It is easier to do a transition from tyranny to democracy than it is to do a transition from anarchy to democracy. With anarchy, you have to begin and start from scratch. It is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do, to start from scratch. In displacing tyranny, you start off with having some instruments of control and power, which are terribly suited for democracy, but which can be transformed if done properly. I think one of the critical mistakes certainly made by the United States in numerous cases, I could cite the case of Nicaragua and the departure of Somoza, or I could cite Iraq, is not relying sufficiently on the apparatuses that were established before by the tyrants themselves and trying to convert them over into something that can be useful in terms of democracy. Instead, we precipitated situations of anarchy from which it was very, very difficult to recover. Anarchy is the mother of tyranny. It is the elements that promise stability in a situation of anarchy that take over the situation and then restore tyranny once again. So tyranny, in fact, rises from the ashes of tyranny, with the intermediate step being anarchy. I think we have covered the issue of elections and the fact that elections themselves don't constitute democracy. I just simply leave that to you as a reminder. I think it's been amply covered by previous panels. Elections are an indispensable component of democracy, but they are insufficient to constitute democracy. Institution building is terribly critical, and we have seen in many, many cases where elections are usurped. After the elections comes the imposition of people who are freely elected, but then who begin to change the terms of the game. It is a democracy, a one-time democracy then, and not a lasting democracy. In order to prevent that from happening, institutions have to be strong enough to withstand the tendencies of people to try and usurp a democracy. And then finally, and I think it brings us to the subject matter of this meeting in very real terms, in order to be able to consolidate the gains of revolution, in order to be able to consolidate the opportunities that are provided by the fall of dictatorship and tyranny, you need to have development. And in order for most of the countries of the world to develop with the kind of speed that is necessary to develop, if they're going to meet the aspirations of their people, you need to have aid and you need to have assistance. Now, I know this is a controversial subject in many quarters, the levels of assistance and whether assistance does any good, but I will tell you that in the business of trying to transform a tyranny to a democracy, assistance is an indispensable component. I think we should touch very briefly on the most important issue facing the world today, and that is the viability of the Arab Spring. First of all, it's probably a misnomer. I can assure you that there are people in totalitarian regimes throughout the world looking to see what happens in North Africa today. This is not just an Arab Spring, this is a global spring. And it's important to keep that in mind because it is the most important issue that we face today. I noted, for example, that the Jasmine Revolution, as it is sometimes called, is a terminology that has been banned from the internet in China. Why is that? It's very simple. What happens in North Africa will sow the seeds of revolution in a number of places around the world, not simply in North Africa and not simply in the Arab world. So what is happening? What is happening? Now, we had a session here, an excellent session, I should say, with some very courageous people, and the question was posed to the audience, are you optimistic about the outcome of the Arab Spring? And I must say, I wanted so badly to raise my hand just to demonstrate my solidarity with what is trying to be achieved, and my heart was in it. But I will tell you, my brain was not in it because I do not see in what is being done today the efforts necessary to consolidate the gains of the revolutions that have taken place or that are still taking place. I do not see the wisdom to bring about the institutional reforms that are necessary, and maybe most pathetically, I don't see the levels of external assistance to this effort being sufficient to get the job done. So I think if I were to look at the situation today, I look at the U.S. trying to play a backseat role in this issue and to leave it to Europe to lead, and I see Europe divided terribly on this issue and unable to lead. The United States sitting in the back seat of a car that's moving at high speed without a driver. So I think that we need to have a much greater degree of unity among the Western countries with respect to how to deal with this issue. We need a vast level of resources to put behind this issue, and there is no more critical issue facing the world today than this issue. So I would call upon this group that is interested in the future of freedom, to be united in support of the notion that the West come to the rescue of the countries that are trying to struggle for democracy, to the forces that are trying to struggle for democracy in North Africa and in the Arab world. If you don't do it, if we don't do it, then we risk very much having a situation arise that is similar to and maybe identical to Sam Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. And if we do it, then we will have a unifying element of democracy and freedom and support for democracy and freedom between the Western countries and the Arab world. And I can't think of a better solution to any number of problems within this region and within the world as a whole. So I urge us all to speak out on behalf of the support for these elements in the Arab world. This is, after all, a fundamental question of freedom. And now I'd like to turn to my panel. Well, I think we have demonstrated that there's a diversity of view in terms of assistance. I think it would be extremely useful if we narrowed our discussion a little bit. I think there's a unanimity on the issue of humanitarian aid. That is to say, I think that humanitarian aid serves its purpose. If you disagree with me, speak up. But I think that there is a great deal of divergence of view when it comes to official development assistance. They use the three categories that George put us in. So I'd like to get your views, each of the panel members, on the issue of official development assistance. And is it useful? Can it build the institutions? In countries like Burma or in countries in Africa, is official development assistance something that is a waste of money? And I certainly have participated in projects in the past that have looked at it, and sometimes it certainly has been a waste of money. But maybe it should be focused on humanitarian assistance, and maybe official development assistance is something that we should relegate to the trash bin. What are your views on it? Jan, why don't we start with you, and we'll work our way this way.
Well, I do agree that humanitarian assistance is by and large effective, but I would underline the limitation also of humanitarian aid that Zoya actually very well referred to. It is a plaster on the wound. It's nothing more. You know, so you feed people now in Misrata in Libya. In the next few days, you help the wounded. The humanitarians save a lot of lives there, and the people will not survive if they don't get it. But it doesn't solve the problem of Libya. I mean, there are root causes here, and it's exactly the same with Burma. And my example of Darfur, we must not only keep people alive, we must give them, hope and freedom. Development assistance, all of it is official. Humanitarian aid is actually counted as ODA. It's part of the figures. The development assistance, and here I agree actually with George, development assistance in terms of prevention is better than the cure. One of the reasons that we're saving a lot of lives now in natural disasters is that there was investment in prevention. Bangladesh, people died massively in every monsoon. Today, very few die. So again, there is a lot of very effective development assistance, and there is a lot of bad of it. And George mentioned one catastrophic Norwegian project in Turkana. I could mention many others, but I could also mention 100 super good Norwegian development assistance projects today, as I would in the United Nations.
Yes. Philippe?
Globally, I completely agree with Jan, as usual. But I would like to take one example about one disease, which is the malaria. 2 months ago in Oslo, there was a meeting at the Red Cross about this disease. Until 1998, the external official development aid was $320 million US. Since the beginning of 2000, the external aid goes to 1.2 billion a year. The results are presented few weeks ago. In 40 countries in Africa, we have a reduction by half of the incidence of malaria. I think that when the development aid is, efficient, with enough money, with prevention, and I completely agree with George about that, I think it's possible. On the contrary, when you see the result about malaria in conflict countries, it's a catastrophe. So I think it's more complicated than it's good or bad. We have to, to cure first the political problems, issues. After that, we can target some issues like health, education, sanitation, very concrete things, or food.
George.
I think there is agreement that certain types of humanitarian relief assistance have been very useful. When you mention diseases like HIV, malaria, and so forth, a lot of progress has been made. And so it's not just a blanket indictment of aid in general. I mean, we're being selective. The main point is that I think we're not saying that the West should not help. I mean, certainly the poor countries need help. But at the same time, we must learn from mistakes. I mean, we all know that the help doesn't reach the needy, those that are mostly in need of help. The West also knows that 40% of its aid is stolen by these kleptocrats. I mean, government-to-government aid has been the most, ineffective. There is little accountability there. Government officials who, I mean, look, I can go through a history. Take a look at Marcos of the Philippines, for example. Everybody knew that the Marcoses and the Mobutus were skimming off Western aid for their own pockets. And much of the Western aid ended up in Swiss bank accounts, okay? All right, in the case of Africa, for example, the whole issue about aid is moot. Moot in the sense that after the end of the Cold War, there was a lot of pressure on the Western donors to reform the aid system, and to add conditionalities, for example. But, for example, aid was supposed to be given to those countries that implemented multi-party democracy. Aid was given to those countries which implemented certain types of reforms, et cetera, et cetera. But then a problem arose, two types of problems. The first one was that there was such a multiplicity of these conditionalities that at one point, the IMF had 38 conditionalities before you got aid. Okay. Now, some of these conditionalities were self-conflicting, contradictory. Now, but the second problem that we face in Africa right now is that we now have a new kid on the block, and that's China with a huge wallet, okay? And they practice what I call chopsticks mercantilism, because they are signing deals all across the continent, and they can pick with chopsticks dexterity a platinum mine in Zimbabwe, a gold mine in Ghana, a bauxite mine in Guinea, for example. And they're signing these deals which are opaque. They are not transparent. Nobody is asking the African people whether these deals are good or bad for the African people. And they are promising aid without any conditionalities. That's where the rub is. And providing aid without any conditionalities doesn't give African autocrats any incentive at all to reform their abominable systems, economic and political systems. So in other words, the Chinese are supporting the autocrats in Zimbabwe, for example, the Omar Bashir of Sudan, and Zenawi of Eritrea. So right now, the West, seems to be in a very, very weak position It can't literally do anything because, if you told Mugabe, to implement reform, then Mugabe will simply laugh at you and go to the Chinese. So that's the problem that we face right now.
So yeah.
Yes, I think, when talking about the prevention, yes, of course it is important. And so far I can see in many countries, not just in Burma, the main prevention is the establishment of a good governance with the respect of rules and of laws and human rights. And I think this ODA assistance, they should be very carefully provided. Like a country with a dictatorship in Burma, I said earlier, we are worried that some of the development aid is not just likely to be stolen, but also can also increase human rights abuses. For example, Asian Highway, which is built in Burma to Thailand. This way, the dictatorship use road constructions and railways and road to transport their soldiers into different parts of Burma, especially in ethnic areas, to facilitate their attack against civilians. So this is linked to direct human rights violation committed by the regime. And in terms of prevention of diseases, when we look at situation in Burma, malaria, tuberculosis, dysentery, these are diseases that cause death. Because of not enough aid and because of lack of aid, many people die. When I went back to Burma in 2003, I was in the jungle meeting with people, and I met a young woman who carried 2 children, and one of her children suffered from dysentery, and another child suffered from malaria. And I asked why they were here in the middle of nowhere in the jungle. And the mother told me that their villages have been burned down by the Burmese army troops, and they were forced to flee. And they had no choice. They were trying to find their way to refugee camp in Thailand. And I didn't even know if her children are still alive. This kind of disease, this kind of death can be prevented by aid. And that is what I would like to mention.
Thank you. George raised the issue of conditionality. And one of the questions I have here relates to, is it an effective device? And I know that there are at least 2 schools of thought. One, that you shouldn't, if you have to impose conditionality, you probably shouldn't be there in the first place. And the other is that no, that aid can be used to leverage better human rights performance. What are your views on that, Jan?
Well, I'm divided on the issue. The problem, I think George put it right. Now the Western assistance, which is not growing, is full of conditionalities, and then there comes from Asia and elsewhere assistance which has one conditionality: we would like to co-share your natural resources. Really, that's the one conditionality. We say, we have to have gender equality, we have to have all sorts of indicators met, we have to have a number of conditionalities, which makes the whole thing very bureaucratic. On the other hand, it's people like us who fought for these conditionalities, ask for NGOs and other campaigned so that there was supposed to be good governance through the assistance. Also, just on government-to-government assistance. Well, again, I'm not quite sure I agree with you there, George, on all of these things. Much government-to-government support can also be good if there is not a functioning government, if there's not a functioning state. That's the story of Norway. Why is Norway successful? Because there was a functioning government and functioning state. It's not because there were hundreds of NGOs who could function. We have also to build a capacity. And the fact that we've gone in the world from a majority of dictatorships to a majority of democracies in the last 25 years gives hope that we can have more effective government-to-government assistance in the future. And even in Africa, yes, there are now a small but growing number of functioning democracies, and we should really focus on making them thrive. And what is often said, liberate them, empower them to take deal of their own future, charge of their own future.
And Philippe, does conditionality really work?
At the beginning of UNITAID, we spoke about that. And we decided to help absolutely not governments. And on the 2.2 billion US dollars, absolutely zero money went to government, to Minister of Health, to Ministry of Health, only through NGOs, UNICEF, Global Fund, Clinton Foundation. But it's a very strong, belief for me. It's very important to have the agreement of the country for the programs on HIV, and malaria, and tuberculosis. Of course, the agreement. But on the ground, we never gave $1 to the government. The second thing is the example of the Global Fund. The program calls debt to health. You take one example. One developing country has a debt of $200 million. You say, okay, you are going to have no debt if you give $200 million for health in your own budget. Because it's terrible to see that Western countries is going to give aid for health and the budget of African countries with dictators give money for weapons. And it's very important to have this conditionality. We can, you are going to have no debt if you implement programs on health for the same sum.
But let me challenge you on one point. You describe the fact that you don't give any money to governments, rather you give it through the NGOs to the ultimate end recipients. But certainly the future lies in having strong and effective governments. Who's going to provide the wherewithal, the funds that are necessary, the training that's necessary in order to get good governance in these countries if everybody adopts the view that you're only going to deal with NGOs?
I completely agree. When I presented UNITAID with only, reduction of the price of drugs and medicines, it's good, but it's not enough. The problem is the health care system. And if we implement a solidarity, a global solidarity tax as the financial transaction tax, if we have 40-50 billion a year, we have to implement the system, the education system, the formation, the education to have medical doctors, nurses, professionals of medicine, and I agree with you. For that, we have to have a state and not a dictator. I agree.
George.
Yeah, I mean, if I may add to, build on, add to what he said in terms of, giving money to our NGOs, I can foresee two problems there, and that is, in the past, as a matter of fact, Canada, for example, gives something like, 30% of its official development aid to NGOs. But the problem is that, it gives that aid to Western-based NGOs, okay, not NGOs that are on the ground in, say, Africa, for example. Now, the problem here is that, see, okay, Western NGOs do a really good job in terms of, protecting, the poor and also the vulnerable. But their problem is that they have to be extremely careful. And that if they say anything which, let's say, al-Bashir doesn't like, they will be kicked out of the country, okay? And you see, the thing is, if you are, say, a Darfuri, for example, okay, okay, you may get, Band-Aid, blankets, and so forth, okay? Okay, which helps. It helps you survive for a couple of days. But, that kind of aid doesn't get to the root cause, okay, of your misery. And the root cause of the misery is a dictatorship that is up there. Okay? Now, the second problem is, all right, let's suppose that, you're going to give aid to the NGOs that are based in the country itself, okay? Now, guess what? If you want to set up an NGO in Zimbabwe, guess who approves, okay, of which type of NGOs are, eligible to accept, foreign donations? It is the dictatorship that approves of these approves of, they call them government-approved NGOs. Okay? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. And I'm not saying that the Western donors are not trying. They are trying, but at the same time, what they need is input from the people who are being helped. Have to make an input.
Well, to get to that question, I have a number of Twitter questions that have come in that express a certain amount of discomfort on both sides of that issue, all the way ranging from, wait a second, who knows best what's best for the patient, the doctor or the patient? To the other side of the issue is how do we get together, or how do we get to know what the real needs are in any given situation? So why don't you tackle both sides of that issue?
Well, the point which I've been making all along is that, Africans are being helped, but our input are not being sought. We have to make an input. I mean, if you want to help American farmers, you ask them what type of help they need. People don't ask Africans what type of help they need. And that is one of the things that I believe needs to change.
Okay. On the issue of conditionality, I think you addressed it pretty completely there, but I take it that your philosophy is that you want to be selective in terms of the kinds of assistance and the targets of the assistance. Do you think it would work with the government of Burma to impose some rigid conditions? For example, if assistance were provided for health in Burma, to force the government of Burma to do an equivalent level of funding? Is that kind of conditionality likely to work with a dictatorship such as you have in Burma?
Well, first of all, I think international community has failed to challenge the dictatorship in Burma. So at the moment, I can't say if they will be able to change the regime restrictions, but they haven't challenged it. And the regime in Burma restricts aid in many parts of the country. And for example, during Cyclone Nargis hit Burma in Irrawaddy Delta area, the regime blocked international aid at first to be delivered in that area. And actually, it wasn't the first time that regime blocked aid like that. The regime has already blocked aid in different parts of Burma, but the UN hasn't challenged this. They just say yes to the regime. They just follow their restrictions. And at the end, people die because aid doesn't reach to the area. But I strongly believe that in Burma case, aid can also be used to promote human rights, like the Norwegian government and some other governments, including Canadian, America, and British government has done. They are providing some support for local organizations, local community-based organizations. Because regime is blocking aid in different parts of Burma, this local community in this area, they have to stand by themselves. Some of them, they crossed the border, they collect aid. Some of them, they provide information about what's human rights violations going on. And they also get information back to the people inside Burma. And most of the human rights violations that we know are from this kind of community organization. It is not from American Central or British Embassy or other embassy from Rangoon. So this kind of community work should be funded by international community more, and to strengthen their capacity for their work for the people.
I see that there seems to be a preoccupation in those who Twitter with the issue of dependency. And how do you both generate a substantial assistance program without at the same time engendering a high level of dependency that is debilitating to democracy? Yeah.
No, I think dependency has been one of the main problems of especially humanitarian food aid and parts of development assistance. Believe me, the amount of thinking and self-critical thinking that has gone into UN organizations, the major NGOs, smaller NGOs, local NGOs, in trying to find out how you can get out of this aid trap of dependency is enormous. Food aid is now always supposed to be short-term, and it's always linked to investment in pharma and farm and agriculture development. There is always an element of shielding the local market. Food aid is often discontinued when there is a harvest, so that there is a market and so on. And this is learning by mistakes, basically. There's been so many catastrophic mistakes that one has learned of these things. And all aid is audited, re-audited, externally audited, externally evaluated again and again to learn from these mistakes. Just final point, because I know we're nearing the end. Aid is often overestimated now. Remittances, I mean, whatever the workers of Africa and Asia and so on send back to their countries is on average 3 times bigger than all assistance. Actually, we're pretty stingy, actually, worldwide. $130 billion is what the United States spends on 1 year in its military campaign in Afghanistan, That's what all countries in the whole world spends on all official development assistance and humanitarian assistance combined. We're spending perhaps $10 billion for humanitarian assistance. In the world, Europeans eat ice cream for 3 times that. So it's the Americans spend many, many times more money on their pets than basically we spend on all humanitarian assistance in the world for many years and so on. It's not that much. But it is crucially important where there is no alternative. So I come back to the misratas of our age. In Darfur, there is no alternative. If we cut assistance today, as you would know, UNHCR and World Food Programme, there is not an alternative. However, I think one major mistake, again, I come back to that, of the humanitarians has been that we became the alibi for lack of political action. So, and again, we have to say to the world, on the Burmese of this world, and now it's not just the West. The West is in decline on this. It's the Asian neighbors and so on to say, what's your plan to fix it? Because it's still an acute ulcer in society. It's not fixed. What's your plan, China? What's your plan, India? What's your plan, ASEAN, for Burma? Because it's not working at the moment. There's still this dictatorship that is the root cause of the problem.
Others want to comment?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead, George.
No, I like to sort of add to what you said in terms of dependency. A lot of countries, governments becoming dependent on aid. And I think donors need to rethink that aid itself can have perverse incentives. In other words, the administration of aid itself suggests to a government that, look, if a government messes up and in the process creates a humanitarian crisis, for example, of course, Western donors will be rushing to come and clean up that humanitarian crisis. So it really doesn't give the government any incentive to correct or prevent that crisis from happening again. As a matter of fact, it may very well be that if the government is in need of money, may artificially create that crisis in order to secure aid. And let's not forget that aid money itself is fungible. Fungible in the sense that, look, let me play a devil's advocate here and pretend that I'm a dictator, although I want to defeat them. But let's suppose that I'm a dictator and I have drawn up a budget to spend, let's say, 100 million on education. And some, Western donor comes and says, well, look, I like your country, the Coconut Republic of Bazunga, and I'd like to help you with education. I'm going to give you $100 million, okay? Now, which means that, okay, I have already budgeted to spend $100 million. So I said to myself, well, if somebody is coming to fund education, then I'm going to shift the $100 million that I had originally planned to spend on education on something else. It could be to build a new presidential palace for myself, or it could be to buy weapons or fighter jets, for example. So in a way, the foreign donor didn't give me money to buy, fighter jet aircraft, jet fighters. But in a way, it advertently has made it possible for me to use, in a very sort of in a very tricky way, allowed me to use that kind of aid money, to be funged into something else. Mm-hmm. So that's where sometimes that's where the problem comes and makes these governments so dependent, because they know they can profit from various novel schemes that they can craft to direct aid money into certain sources.
Yeah. Philippe and then Zoya.
No, I think that about the dependency, the most important thing is the education. But if you take, for example, agriculture, it's not possible to develop agriculture if you don't have engineers. You can be efficient on epidemics or disease, if in general, in developing countries, if you don't have a teacher for nurses, for medical doctor, etc. And it's a hardcore of the future of this continent. Unfortunately, we have not enough evaluated studies, and I think that we move forward very efficiently for health, for example, not for education. And I think it's a... And look, in Tunisia, for example, because, you have, during 50 years, a lot of children at school. After 50 years, you have, a revolution, because it's not possible to have educated people and corruption. It's not possible. But if you don't have education, you have a lot of corruption, of course.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yes, I would like to mention that, of course, we want more humanitarian aid in Burma because we survive because of aid. But at the same time, we also would like to see more aid that provides capacity building for local community and for the people. And I would like to come back to the point about international tackling the dictatorship. Actually, the regime in Burma, they are not immune to international pressure. If there is enough international pressure, I'm sure the regime will have to do something for the proper development of the country. I'll give you one example. In May 2008, when Cyclone Nargis hit Burma, more than 130,000 people died. And at first, the regime blocked aid to be delivered in this area. But then when international community started making noise, Ban Ki-moon himself went to Burma, supported by the ASEAN, neighboring countries, and European Union and others. And this was when the regime was very fragile, and they did open up to some area for the delivery of aid. And this is one example how international pressure can work. That's why we need more to see pressure.
We have time, I think, just for one more issue to raise. And we have spent a lot of time talking about dictatorships and conditionality and how do you force governments that are not effective governments to be able to handle aid effectively. But let's turn for a little bit to the new democracies, and let's take specifically North Africa, take Tunisia or Egypt, for example. What does the international community need to do now to assist those countries to consolidate their revolutions?
Well, I think you pointed at one issue in your introduction, Craig. We have to learn from the history because, George is also right. The number one lesson is it's never a good idea to go to bed with a dictator. And that's what we did again and again with Mubarak. Was, his regime was built from A to Z, basically, in terms of military and security hardware by the West. I won't repeat with whom Ben Ali was vacationing the Christmas before he fell, or how everybody was falling all over Gaddafi because he promised to help us in the West in the war on terror. So I think that's number one. I mean, it's not a good idea to go to bed with dictators, ever. Number two, education was the source of this thing, which they do themselves. I mean, it's not the external. They did this, and education helped. I think that is, it's not Facebook, really, which made the revolution. It's education. Exactly. People knew what they were cheated of. So there was a whole generation of young people who had not the same, had education which their parents and grandparents did not have, and they could watch Al Jazeera in Arabic, and there's information uncensored, also for the first time. What can we do now is basically to help also avoid that their economy goes to pieces. One of the things that happened was that the West took out all of their tourists from completely calm resorts in Egypt when this thing happened. So there is less employment today in Egypt than there was before the revolution. We're doing less actually now economically to help the change in Tunisia and Egypt than we did before. So more investment, more investment, economic cooperation, and then be a little humility, as we say. Maybe we can help you, but we'd like to listen to you, what your needs are.
Philippe?
First of all, I want to say to Jan that I didn't spend Christmas with Ben Ali.
It was another one. It was another one.
It's a joke.
No, I know. I know.
No, one word for me, investment. And because I am European, I hope, very strongly hope, that Mr. Barroso is going to announce a lot of billions of investments. It's good for Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, but for Tunisia, it's absolutely vital. And for Europe as well, because we are linked. And I hope it's not the case so far, but we have to ask that if European Union exists, it is very important to see European Union invest massively in Tunisia now. Not only for tourism, but for it's incredible to see this youth, very educated youth, in mathematics, in physics, in medicine. It's incredible. Investment, private investment as well.
George.
I can't believe this. This is the wrong advice to be given Tunisia. Yesterday I spoke about this, and that is, look, when you remove a dictator, it does not necessarily establish a free society. You got to go through a series of reforms, and it takes time before you can create an environment for investment. Number one, you need to have intellectual reform, freedom, and you need to have political reform. And that is, look, you have to disband the RCD party in Tunisia. You have to disband Mubarak's party, okay, in Egypt, okay? And number three, you need to have constitutional reform. Constitutional reform means that, you have to strip the executive of all the powers that it has accumulated, okay? And then, most important, you need to have institutional reform. Institutional reform is you have to deworm all those institutions where Mubarak has packed his allies. In Tunisia, Ben Ali has packed his allies. If you don't do that, and you promote investment right now, you're going to have a situation like, in Russia, where you have a few people with inside information and inside knowledge grab state assets, and you transform that country into vampire capitalism. No, you have to follow these type of reforms. Don't push Tunisia, don't push Egypt too quickly. It took South Africa 3 years to move from apartheid to democratic rule. It took the US 13 years to move from independence in 1776 to a full constitutional rule in 1789. So please, tell the Tunisians to take their time and to disassemble the dictatorship. They've gotten rid of the dictator, but not the dictatorship. Take their time. If we push them to rush through this, they're going to replace one dictator with another dictator.
Let me challenge you. I think everything you said is right. The only question that I would have, and where I would have a disagreement, is I don't think there's a lot of time to be had. So I don't think these things can be done sequentially. You can't do this and then that and then that and that. There are 200,000 unemployed youth there who will not tolerate standing by for 3 years waiting for these things to happen. So I think these things have to be done parallel. All of the things you said have to be done. There's no question. I don't think any of us would disagree with that. But can we really hold back on the economic stimulus that's required in order to bring some employment while all of that happens? I don't think the answer is yes to that. Zoya.
Well, actually, I'm looking at the situation in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, and other countries in Middle East. I was very inspired to see what was going on with the youth there, and with the courage they have to overthrow the dictatorship. And that is what I hope that it will happen in Burma as well. And I think we have to take it slowly. I agree with George that we have to make sure that what people in Burma, people in these countries are the most suitable and what they want. Because if we rush into investment, like George said, it can and could bring in another dictatorship. And in terms of Burma, of course, investment at the moment will go through the regime's pocket, and it will be used to the abuses of human rights violations in Burma. So I think we have to be very careful with dealing with this kind of situation.
I'd like to wrap this up then and simply make an observation that I think we could discuss facets of this issue for the next 3 days and still not conclude everything that needs to be talked about. There has not been a single mention here on this panel today about women, for example, and yet I think providing assistance to women's groups in North Africa is probably one of the most critical things to be able to do, because I think it's the women who will form essentially the bulwark against extremism within the region. There are many, many facets to development and how development interacts with freedom. But one thing I think that we're all in agreement with, and that is that you cannot separate these two issues. Freedom and political freedom and economic development go hand in hand together, and they need to be approached in a holistic way in order for us to have hope for either development or for freedom. Thank you very much, panel.
Thank you.
It's very, very distinguished.